break this all down with the front bench panel. Joining me right now are Sabrina Grover. She was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now principal at Shakti Strategies. Melanie Paradis is the former communications director to Erin O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. Former Ontario NDP MPP Gurtan Singh. He's now the vice president of Crestview Strategies, also the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. And with me in studio, CTV News senior digital parliamentary reporter Rachel Aiello. Thank you all for being here. Sabrina, let's start with you on this one. What did you think of Ambassador Ray's explanation for resuming funding?
I think that Ambassador Ray is right on point to say that this is, a humanitarian crisis that we cannot ignore, and that part of not ignoring that is restoring funding to UNRWA. I also think that Canada is not alone in restoring this funding. We know that the EU also has done that in recent days. And I think that the most important thing to come out of, this the funding restoring and some of the comments that Ambassador Ray has made is that Israel also needs to cooperate with this investigation. Australia has called for that. The EU has called for that. Canada is now calling for that. This is death by starvation. I think that there's an estimated 100,000 people who've been affected by the hunger situation as it is. The United Nations estimates that 90% of people will be affected by a famine. The pictures that are coming out of Gaza are horrific, and we can't afford to wait and let this crisis continue. And so I think it is time for Israel to also come to the table and cooperate. But I think Canada's made the right decision here in maintaining a humanitarian crisis from expanding.
Yeah, Melanie, I put it directly to Ambassador Ray. He says it's not politically motivated, but do you think that the Liberals are feeling the pressure here at home and within their caucus?
100%. They're feeling the pressure and they're bowing to it. And what's so disappointing is we've been referring to this as having been funding that was frozen. It was never actually frozen. At the time when the Trudeau government said that they were going to freeze the funding to UNRWA, they had already made their payments through to April. It's now March, and they're saying we're going to resume payments. So UNRWA won't have missed a single penny from the Canadian government. They'll have seen no punishment or retribution for the heinous corruption within that organization. The fact that they had to fire 12 employees because this investigation has indicated that they were involved directly or indirectly in the acts that took place on October 7th, including the rape and murder of women, of innocent people. It's atrocious. I think that in terms of the humanitarian crisis, no one should dispute that is happening, and it is egregious. And absolutely, Canada has a role to play in providing relief to the people of Gaza. The President of the United States last night talked in the State of the Union address about a humanitarian pier that the Americans are proposing to build into the sea, which is effectively like a giant seaport for humanitarian aid. Canada should be contributing to something like that. We don't need UNRWA, a corrupt organization, in order to help get aid that is desperately needed into Gaza. There are many other ways that we could be doing this.
Gurtan, I mean, no one can doubt that there is a need, as Melanie just said, but should Canada have waited just a little bit longer, at least for the conclusion of that report?
I think what people are effectively, the position that's being put out right now is that we can't afford to wait. When you look at the extent of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the people who are facing famine, lack of resources, medicine, and more, that was the most direct route towards providing those resources. And no one should face the collective punishment as a result of an agency, which is, if there's investigations going on, it should continue to go on. We should make sure that anyone who's involved in the heinous acts of October 7th are held to account. But that should also not prevent innocent people who just need to get access to the food and resources they need to get that support, especially when it's pretty much undisputed. There's drastic and devastating human rights. The conditions are very, very deplorable right now, and there's a crisis right now, a human rights crisis. So ultimately, I think that we need to prioritize those innocent folks and make sure they're getting the resources they need at a time that's truly desperate.
Yeah, and Rachel, as Melanie was saying there was no payment missing at this point to UNRWA, and it's not exactly clear what the deadline was today. I mean, can you sort of understand why you think they needed to rush this decision and put it out the door on a Friday like this?
Well, Mike, the one thing that stood out to me from Minister Hussein's remarks today was he made the point of saying that Canada is now the first G7 country to restore this funding. And so my read on that is that they wanted to be able to have that little factoid, that talking point that going forward, as they're continuing to be grilled on what they're doing on this file, to have that to point back to. Because arguably, compared to the United States, what Canada is actually substantively contributing to this humanitarian aid relief is not there, but they are able to hold on to this piece of information now and saying, you know, Canada was the first to restore it. I expect to hear Minister Hussein repeat that going forward and something the government will be able to point back to. So I wonder if the timing of getting out ahead was a factor today.
Sabrina, what do you think about that they want to be seen as a leader on this, if not a true leader on it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think Canada knows its place as a middle power, and I think it also knows its place as a humanitarian leader. And I think that this is part of keeping up with that leadership and restoring funding to UNRWA to prevent the expansion of a humanitarian crisis. And I just want to give, you know, the audience a little bit of context to this organization. When we talk about 12 people, UNRWA employs 30,000 people in Palestine. It employs 99% of Palestinians. So it's not an organization where out of 30 people, 12, you know, over half were considered part of this crisis. And I think that the organization dealt with it swiftly, and the investigation's ongoing. We're still waiting to see the results. But, you know, to talk about the ways in which the United States is going to be setting up this port and getting aid in, that's not going to happen immediately. This is an organization that is providing immediate relief to people, and that literally means life or death to Palestinians in the region, but also to others in the region. And, you know, coming from an international development background, you know, I think it's important to understand some of those contexts, that you can't just set up aid overnight. And at the end of the day, you really shouldn't be letting people die overnight because of a stalling investigation. So I think it's good what Canada's done, and I think they've taken that leadership role on purpose.
Melanie, I wanted to get back to what Ambassador Ray was saying about the information that was coming from Israel. It was coming as drips and drabs, and said they have not yet met with the investigating team. Should the government have pushed a little further and a little harder on that before resuming the funding?
Absolutely, they should have. They should be, you know, speaking diplomatically, contacting their colleagues in Israel and asking, like, why hasn't this happened? What's going on? Can you speed this up? There may be very real reasons why there has been a delay. And I think that, again, Canada is just backpedaling here. And instead of coming up with our own plan for how to help people in Palestine, in Gaza, that they're just leaning on UNRWA, which we know is an organization that has serious corruption issues. And I'd argue that, you know, one person is a bad apple, maybe two people, but a dozen people, that's a systemic problem. I understand it's a big organization, but 12 people that we know of participating, enough information was provided to UNRWA for them to fire those people in advance of this investigation. I think that demonstrates there's systemic rot within the organization.
Gordon, I've got about a minute left. I'm going to try and split it between you and Rachel. But do you think that this government right now is striking the proper balance with this situation?
I think what we've seen once again is the Liberals having an issue with communication. When you have initially this story being leaked, then the Prime Minister refusing to answer it, and now a decision coming at the end of the day on a Friday, hoping to, you know, sneak in this decision without bringing too much attention to it. So I think the government is just right now facing a communication issue that they really need to just resolve.
Rachel, how do you think, even though that we're in the middle of a 2-week break from Parliament Hill, how does this play between the parties, you think?
Well, we've already seen some early reaction. The NDP have already kind of suggested the Liberals were waffling in making this decision. Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman called the announcement of the restoring of funding vile. So very polarized on the either side of the opposition parties here. And then there is that division within the Liberal caucus as well. Interesting to note which MPs were and weren't standing behind Minister Hussein today. So I feel like that is going to continue to play out. I don't feel like this is a decision that's going to assuage the diversity of views on this within that Liberal caucus.